Hi, I'm Jennifer Valmadre and I'd like to welcome you into my art studio and also into my practice. This is a shed, not a studio really. I grew up in a cane farm, so I think of workplaces as sheds, and studios I also think are really nice, tidy, maybe even air-conditioned spaces. I was really fortunate in 2003, I think it would have been, to be acquired by the Regional Gallery for the collection, and it's a large work called The Source. The source was distinctly related to my childhood. I grew up on a cane farm, and the cane surrounds the house and gets really tight. So all you see is when you wake up, you just see cane, and then all of a sudden the cane's cut. And we end up with these very broken up pieces of land that are cut into squares, and then we put rows in those squares and we plant a cane in those squares, so it all becomes quite angular, and all that lovely nurturing comfort of the close-grown cane is gone. So the source starts with that, but it was also an exploration work. That was one of my first series of works I started to do in wax. So it allowed me to burn and cut wax in ways that I hadn't done before, because I wanted quite a brutal surface, and I started to use the carving and cutting of wax, which caused problems of course because it flaked off the grounds, and I needed to work out ways to fuse that wax back on. So I ended up heavily relying on a gas burning torch. So I used to flame the work quite heavily to ensure that the wax is fused into the porosity of the timber, so it's sunk in there, so that when I cut and carve it, it doesn't flake off. But through the process I discovered that I also needed to alter my wax blends, and there's many different kinds of wax you can buy, and I've settled on using a mix of paraffin and microcrystalline wax, over which I used bitumen, superchrome silver paint and shellac. So superchrome is silver, I coat that with shellac and it sends a soft gold. It's very important to have that shellac because the silver paint cleans up in a terpenoid, and bitumen, which I put on as my last coat and buff off, is terpenoid. So those little discoveries were really serendipitous to work out how could I possibly stop. I loved the idea of the silver reflecting through the bitumen, but how did I preserve that enamel paint so that it didn't get wiped off basically by the bitumen? And it was simply to coat that with a methylated spirits cleanup, so the bitumen didn't tarnish it. But it was a lot of to and fro to arrive at that point. It was also a matter of making enough tooth in the wax to ensure that my painted surfaces survived. The second work I did with the Regional Gallery was for this fabulous touring sculpture show, moving sculptures it was, and it went to schools. We again looked at the reflection of, it had to be personal. So I decided to elect the iconic shape of the cane knife to carry the content of cane farming, and on top of those I put decals, ceramic decals of my grandfather, and back in the days where the cane was still hauled by horse. So there was a layer of history there because we haven't been cane farmers for many years now, and it was just such a lovely childhood. That accompanied with the cut cane, which is the billets, and they were a lovely shift because there's a very rich green glaze that I needed to perfect to get the sense of green cane. And all of those were then brilliantly boxed up by the gallery so that they go to schools and they're unpacked, and the packaging becomes the plinth. I have not actually seen that work since it's been made, so it'll be really exciting one day to have a look. In 2019, the Cairns Gallery purchased Ossified Scribblings off me, which I've touched on briefly earlier, but that's been a really important move for me, moving into a purely ceramic basis. Much of my work prior had been a blend of ceramic or primarily encaustic, and I really did want to push my boundaries with how to work on a larger scale with ceramics. Ceramics, of course, in itself is restricted by kiln size, and my kiln size wasn't large, which means to make a large work I had to make multiple pieces of work that hung together. To work that out, I had to change the clay body, so I wanted to be able to ice areas to make them very feminine and soft, which I then I fixed onto the other pieces. These would all have to be done in the raw state, and shrinkage and expansion of clay is a problem. So like many potters now, you add paper to your clay and you reduce it back down to a slurry and reconstitute it back into a clay body, and you reduce the shrinkage rate. So now we can actually fit dry to wet. So it was really kind of cool. I could make the large body structure and keep it moist, and then affix these solid dry pieces using waddings of paper clay. And it allowed a great deal of flexibility rather than trying to work in a constant state of moisture.